Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us out anywhere you get your podcast from. It's a Wednesday live, which means you know the drill. We're going to have a Penguins week in review, talking about a very good week for the Pittsburgh Penguins, including a stellar victory over a good Los Angeles Kings team last night at PPG Paints Arena. Then we'll do a Pens preview, look ahead to the 3 remaining games before the holiday break. I'll have my 3 stars of this previous week, and then we'll answer all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, make sure you drop your question in the comment section below. We'll try to get to as many as we can before we head out today. Week in review is 2-0-1, but before we get to last Thursday's win over Montreal, the overtime loss to the Ottawa Senators on Saturday, just in general, want to kick off this show by giving the Pittsburgh Penguins some props. That was probably, no, scratch that. That was definitely the best hockey game that I have seen them play this entire season. For just the second time this season, the Penguins came from behind when trailing after 2 periods all the way back to claim victory over the Los Angeles Kings. They're 2-14-1 when trailing after 2, which is not great, but seeing them do that on top of the fact that now they are 7-2-1 in their last 10, you have to start to feel a little bit better about the boys in black and gold. They played very well, not just on the ice in entirety yesterday. They were very good defensively, which color me surprised, because whenever you lose a guy like Marcus Pettersson, I understand the team as a whole has not been good defensively all year, and Pettersson has not been at his best all year, but whenever you lose your best defensive defenseman and then respond by coming out the following game and having probably your best defensive performance of the entire season, that you have to give credit where credit is due, and credit is due to all 6 of those guys on the blue line. Ryan Shea and Ryan Graves, I thought, had a pretty good game as the third pairing. Matt Grzelcyk and Erik Karlsson, I mean, they are what you expected them to be. They're take it all on offense, take some on defense, but they played pretty good yesterday. Erik Karlsson in particular was on his horse a lot of yesterday, and it wasn't the best game for Owen Pickering. Probably one of the games where he struggled the most in his short tenure at the NHL level, but I thought he played pretty solid through most of the game as well. A couple of young, rookie mistakes, but you're going to get that with Owen Pickering, especially if he's playing 20 plus minutes a night, not just at 5-on-5, but as your top penalty kill defenseman, which was what he has been the last couple of games, with Marcus Pettersson going down on Saturday and then obviously not being available to the Penguins yesterday. I thought that version, the version of the Pittsburgh Penguins that we saw last night, can beat almost anybody in this league. Any given night, as Sarah says here, a coach once told me that, quote, on any given day, one team can beat another. Well, yesterday, the Pittsburgh Penguins beat a very good Los Angeles Kings team. And if they can show up consistently at that level, which I get is a difficult ask because that's the best they've played in 33 games. So expecting them to be able to replicate that over the rest of the season is a large ask, and it's probably an impossible task. But if they can replicate that version on a semi-consistent basis, just going to say things might get a little interesting for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So all in all, great performance last night in a 3-2 overtime victory over the Los Angeles Kings. All in all, a pretty good week for the Pittsburgh Penguins as they continue to stack performances. And no, they don't have this long 8, 9, 10 game win streak, but they are 7-2-1 in their last 10. And for a long portion of that stretch, they were playing teams above 500. They were playing teams who sat in the top 3 of their respective divisions, especially playing all 3 of the top 3 in the Atlantic Division. Yesterday was against the Kings, who were second coming into the game in the Pacific Division. Yes, on any given day, one team can beat another, like Sarah says. But the Penguins have been beating good teams pretty frequently over the past couple of weeks. It hasn't always been pretty. It hasn't. Sometimes they haven't been even remotely close to looking good and still coming out with a win, i.e. against the Florida Panthers. But then a game like last night shows you that even without Marcus Pettersson, even with Alex Nedeljkovic, who this season has struggled mightily, they can go out there and put together a really good performance. Stellar on the blue line. Alex Nedeljkovic deserves a shout out because he was very good last night as well. And the Penguins get a win when they were down 1-0, when they were down 2-1, when the LA Kings were doing what the LA Kings do best. I think that is a very impressive victory for the Penguins. So 2-0-1 over this past week. Let's get into the full week in review. A 9-3 win over Montreal, which who knew the Penguins had that much offense in them? 9-3 win in Montreal. That is the season sweep then of the Penguins over the Montreal Canadiens. 3-0 this year against the Habs. Listen, you got to be able to do it against teams at the bottom of the conference. You can't just play up to competition. You have to play at a very high level against lower competition. They showed that the Montreal Canadiens, while there might not be too many teams that are considered lower competition this year, the Habs are one of them, and the Penguins were able to take care of business at the Bell Center. 3-2 overtime loss to Ottawa and a 3-2 overtime win against the LA Kings. Anytime you can come away from a week with 5 out of 6 standings points, especially considering where the Penguins are at in the standings, where they're in the bottom and they're just trying to slowly climb that ladder, 5 out of 6, you're never going to be overly upset. Would you have liked to get that second point in Ottawa? Yes, especially considering that overtime goal that Brady Tkachuk scored is one that Tristan Jarry probably would like to have back. But 5 out of 6 points, hard to complain about them, especially when the last thing you saw was that game last night. I'll stop boasting about it. But the game last night and the game on Saturday, to me, were two extremely similar scripts, which is probably why you saw the Pittsburgh Penguins succeed to the level that they did last night, because they essentially had a tune-up game for the LA Kings matchup on Saturday night in Ottawa. Low-scoring affair, physical and heavy opponent, and the fact that they had to battle back throughout pretty much the entire game. Same script on Saturday. They couldn't get the job done. They were able to force overtime, but couldn't get that second point. They come in yesterday, WWE night, which I had a lot of fun with because I'm a fan of professional wrestling. Loved the WWE night stuff that they did yesterday, and loved the fact that the Pittsburgh Penguins, as the underdog at home, were able to go out there and get the job done in the second of two very, very similar games against the Sens and then against the LA Kings. So 2-0-1 on the week. The Penguins 7-2-1 in their last 10. And don't look now, because you missed it already. It was a blink and you miss it proposition. The Penguins were in a playoff spot for about an hour and 25 minutes last night. After their win over the LA Kings, thanks to a little bit of help around the league, the New York Rangers continue to fall way off the face of the earth, and a couple other teams falling as well. Penn sat in wild card 2 spot, and I understand the games in hand are a factor, but it's starting to get erased a little bit. There's a couple teams that have games in hand that can knock the Penguins down a peg, but for the most part, that ends after the Philadelphia Flyers and the New York Rangers. Yes, Ottawa has games in hand, which is why that 1 point off is so deceiving. And again, it's December 18th. The standings are going to change a lot between now and April, but you want to put yourself in a better position. You want to see your team in a better position, especially considering how slow the Penguins started this season. To see them before the turn of the new year get back to the place where they were sitting in a playoff spot for 80 minutes is a pretty nice thing to see. Now, that also has to be really good for another reason. That has to be great for the mentality of this team. Like I mentioned, abysmal start to the season. 6 weeks of struggles for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and nobody was immune to it. Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic were struggling. The defense was some of the worst that we have seen. The forward side of things was ridiculous. It cost Lars Zeller his time in Pittsburgh. They ended up trading him. Sidney Crosby struggled early in the season, had a good run, and has been struggling since. Evgeni Malkin has had his ups and downs. The same can be said for pretty much everybody on the roster. You can go down the line and talk about how in the first 6 weeks, most of them struggled. Michael Bunting got off to a really slow start, but has been electrifying over the last 10 games. But yesterday, they get off the ice. I'm sure somebody showed them, because Listen, Josh Yohe of The Athletic, Seth Rorabaugh of The Trib, they were all over it. They were posting the screenshots. Penguins, as of this moment, are sitting in a playoff spot. That has to be great for the mentality of the team. And you love to see it when this team has been through what they've been through, to be able to come out and play the hockey that they've played over the last 10 games and just get that little bit of a reward of, hey, all your work has helped you propel yourself back into the conversation. And that's all you can ask for after the slow start. Not to mention the fact that for a while there, they were in the basement of the Metro. They currently sit in 4th place in the Metropolitan Division. I get things are very slow, and one bad week can bump you down, especially when you have 2 Metropolitan Division matchups coming up. But sitting in 4th place in the Metropolitan Division before the Christmas break is not something that I thought I'd get to say. And fortunately, because of the performance on the ice, that's what all of us get to say, because that's where they sit as of this moment. So what's coming up next for the Pittsburgh Penguins after another solid week? 2 wins, 5 out of 6 standings points. What's on the docket between now and that 4-day Christmas break that they have coming up next week? Well, for one, off day today, they practiced, but they're heading out to Nashville to take on a team that beat the New York Rangers yesterday. So you have to take that into account. But a team that is sitting in 31st or 32nd in the National Hockey League, depending on when you watch this episode. They're one of the worst teams in the league, inexplicably, because they have a lot of talent. Jonathan Marchessault is a dangerous player. Steven Stamkos is a dangerous player. And this is a team that last year was one of the hottest teams going into the playoffs. They have a good goaltender in UC Saros. They're a dangerous team. They just haven't been able to put it together. So don't take Thursday as a cakewalk, because the Penguins went out and beat the 2nd place team in the Pacific, and now we're playing the 32nd ranked team in the National Hockey League. It's a road matchup against a Nashville team that, if you want to be considered a serious team going into the Christmas break, you need to take care of business in Nashville on Thursday, similar to how they took care of business at the Bell Center last Thursday when they beat the Montreal Canadiens 9-2. I'm not expecting a 9-2 blowout. I'm expecting the Penguins to take care of business. They need to be able to do that against Nashville, especially because of who's coming up on Saturday. Penguins, Devils, at the Rock, at Prudential Center in New Jersey. The Devils are a massive mismatch for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've been able to push back a little bit, but if the New Jersey Devils are playing at their level that they want to play at, it's a hard game for the Pittsburgh Penguins to match up in. Why? Because the Penguins struggle against teams that have elite speed. That's what the Devils have, and they've been using it to get themselves to the top of the Metropolitan Division and some of the top in the Eastern Conference in the NHL. They're a very talented team. They're a very young team. They're a very fast team. That is a mismatch for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And yet, the Pens have played them better on the road than at home. So when you're playing in this stretch where the Pens are starting to play better hockey, it's actually a better draw to get New Jersey on the road right now than it is to get New Jersey at PPG Paints Arena. The Penguins in their last 10 against New Jersey are 3-6-1, which is not great. But all 3 of those wins have come at Prudential Center. They are 3-2-1, grabbing, what would that be? 7 of a potential 12 points at Prudential Center over the last handful of seasons. So that is going to be a massive kind of litmus test for the Pittsburgh Penguins this weekend, because they're certainly starting to look like one of the better teams in the bottom half of the East. Because you look at the top half of the East, you have the Panthers, who the Penguins did beat. You have the Boston Bruins, who are playing better under Joe Sacco, who the Penguins did beat a couple weeks ago. You have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who, wait a minute, the Penguins beat. If you beat the New Jersey Devils, you've then beaten 4 of the top 5 teams in the Eastern Conference. That's a statement game. That's why this is a massive game for the Pittsburgh Penguins coming up on Saturday. And you cannot look past the Philadelphia Flyers on a Monday. Last game before the holiday break, you have to see what the psyche is of the Penguins, the psyche is of the Flyers, just in general, not taking any particular player, particular coach into account, just in general. That last game before a holiday break is easier for the road team for the simple reason of you have to be locked in because you're not at home. Meanwhile, you're the home team. You're coming out of your house, driving to the arena and saying, well, I could just drive home after this and start my holiday break. Or if you're traveling, you say, all right, well, I got my travel plans. We don't have to worry about a team charter flight back home. I just go get in the car, go to the airport with my family, and we're gone. So as a general rule of thumb, it's easier for the road team to lock in on that last game before a holiday break. It's the first time these two teams are matching up this year. You're hoping that the Pittsburgh Penguins are ready for it. So at Nashville Thursday, at New Jersey on Saturday, then back home against Philly on Monday. It should be an interesting week. The opportunity is there for the Penguins to have another 2-1 or maybe even, dare I say, 3-0 week, especially if they play the way that they played yesterday. I'm going to jump into my 3 stars of the week here, but before I do, just another quick reminder, if you're tuned in live on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, first and foremost, appreciate you joining. Secondly, drop your question in the comment section below, because after the 3 stars of the week, we're going to jump right into all your questions and answer as many as we can before we head out of here. But let's get into the 3 stars of the week segment. Third star of the week, the second defenseman I have given a star to all season long. Owen Pickering got one in his first week at the NHL level because I loved the way that he responded in his first taste of NHL action. And honestly, I love the way he's responded since. This time, it goes to his defense partner, Kris Letang. 3 games played, 2 goals, 1 assist in this past week. He has quickly turned his season around because he was one of the worst on the Pittsburgh Penguins blue line to start the season. He was struggling mightily. You couldn't figure out what it was. Some would say, well, it's because he's with Matt Grzelcyk. It's not a good pairing. Grzelcyk isn't capable of handling that type of minutes anymore, and it's bringing down Kris Letang. You need to put him with Pettersson. Well, then he goes with Pettersson. He still struggles a little bit. Now, he's with Owen Pickering, and it seems like those two are meshing. According to Natural Stat Trick, just a little nugget here for you, Pickering and Letang, as a pairing, are allowing 1.4 expected goals against per 60 minutes. It's a very good number. And if you want to know what it was with the other 2 line mates that Kris Letang has had this season, with Matt Grzelcyk, it's 3.05 expected goals allowed per 60. And with Marcus Pettersson, it was 3.3 goals allowed per 60 minutes. So with Owen Pickering, Kris Letang has kind of rejuvenated. He's jumped up. And not only does he have 2 goals, 1 assist in his last 3 games played, he's been on a scoring stretch for the last 10 games, scoring goals at a huge clip for a defenseman and putting up points and playing very good hockey. Now he's going to be tasked with playing some more penalty kill than he had all season long. He handled that well yesterday. The Pens PK did a very good job against the LA Kings. How does that affect what Letang is able to do? And does it actually help? Because now it's going to be him and Owen Pickering on the penalty kill. It's going to be him and Owen Pickering at 5-on-5. And if Pickering can sustain and Pickering can continue to improve, that's just going to give Kris Letang more confidence in himself, in his partner, and just in the game overall. So I love what I'm seeing out of Kris Letang. This is probably the best hockey that we've seen him play all season, and the best hockey that we've seen him play since early of last season. So third star of the week goes to the French Canadian, Kris Letang. Let's go over to the second star of this week, and we're going to Tricky Ricky Ricard Raquel, who, shout out to the Pittsburgh Penguins PR department, who put up a stat. I want to make sure I bring it up and get it right here. Since Ricard Raquel was, you can say snubbed, people have their own opinions, since he was left off of Team Sweden in the 4 Nations face-off. Here it is. Penguins PR 15 hours ago. Leads all Swedish players with 4 goals and 8 points in 6 games. Shout out to Penguins PR for that tidbit. Ricard Raquel, an absolute animal. 3 goals, 3 assists in the last 3 games played. Had a huge performance against Montreal where he notched 4 points, 2 of them being goals, 2 of them being assists. Gets the game-winning goal last night on a tremendous tip-in on an Erik Karlsson shot, and he's leading all Pittsburgh Penguins in goal scoring. 14 goals on the season this year. You go back to last season where he did miss some time due to injury, played in only 70 games, also was being affected by that shoulder injury for the remainder of the season. 15 goals the entire season last year, 14 on the year this year, which is a pace of 35 if he plays the entire 82-game slate. A tremendous start to the season, and at this point, it's further than a start. It's almost halfway through the season. Ricard Raquel is absolutely lights out for the Pittsburgh Penguins. 3 goals, 3 assists in this past week, which is why he deserves and has earned the second star of the week honors. And the number 1 star, Notre Dame has a big game on Friday night. Notre Dame, Indiana, college football playoff, but that's fine because this former Fighting Irish is absolutely lighting the world on fire right now. First star of the week, Bryan Rust. Can't go away from the guy when he scores a hattie, right? 3 goals, 2 assists in 3 games played. Added an assist last night as well on the first goal of the game. This guy has been absolutely phenomenal. We talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins being 7-2-1 in their last 10 games played. Bryan Rust is a major reason for that success. 21.9% shooting percentage. The guy just cannot seem to miss. Bryan Rust, first star of the week, shooting the lights out right now for the Penguins, and rounds out the 3 stars of the week for the week of December 16th. Kris Letang, number 3, Rickard Rakell, number 2, and Bryan Rust as the number 1 star of the week. Vibes are high for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Stars are starting to play better. Sidney Crosby played one of, if not his best games of the season yesterday. He was sniffing it. He was getting close to getting back on the board for the first time since he scored Mr. 600 against the Utah Hockey Club, which is interesting because I'm sure that we can dive into this and the psychology of it some other time, but that was the turning point for the Penguins. Crosby scores 600. They lose 6-1 to a non-playoff team on home ice, mind you, in the Utah Hockey Club. Since then, 7-2-1. A lot of those wins against teams above 500. A lot of those wins against teams that are currently sitting atop of the Eastern and Western Conference standings. And their best performance to date this season against the LA Kings. All comes down to Crosby, even when Crosby's not contributing goals on the score sheet. He still had, I believe it was 9 assists in the 9 games played leading into yesterday, and he had a tremendous assist on the game-tying goal for Matt Grzelcyk. So he's still finding ways to contribute. Maybe not as much as everybody would like him to. He's finding ways to contribute, and it seems like the fact that everybody else let him down in that Utah game has galvanized the unit, has galvanized the team, and has turned into the Pittsburgh Penguins going 7-2-1 in the last 10. I keep saying it because it's crazy, because I wouldn't have thought that this team would have gone on a 7-2-1 stretch all season long based on how they performed in October, throughout most of November, but here we are. They're playing great hockey, and because of that, they're sitting in a pretty solid position in the Eastern Conference and Metropolitan Division standings. That's all I'm going to talk about when it comes to my agenda. I want to get to your agenda, the listener, the most important part of this entire situation, which is you, the 52 of you that are currently tuned in live, and more are checking in as I speak. Drop your question in the comment section. We'll get to as many as we get to, or as many as we can before this hour is up. We got a handful in here, and let's start it off with Austin, who says, with guys like Pettersson and Michael Bunting hard to come by, would it still make sense to move them, given you'd have to find guys like this anyway to give the core its, quote, one last go? Is one more go still even in the plans? I think Kyle Dubas, again, not speaking as somebody who's talked to Kyle Dubas extensively about his plans, but from what he said, it seems like if there's hope that is given to him that this team can do something, he's going to try to back it. He's going to try to give them as much of an opportunity as they can, as long as it doesn't come at the heels or at the expense of the future. They're not going to trade away a first-round pick no matter how good the Penguins are playing. They're probably not going to trade away a top prospect no matter how good the Pens are playing. So if you think they're going to go out there and they're going to spend a major asset in their prospect system or their draft system in order to bring some big name in, that's not going to happen. But this, what Austin highlights here, is going to be something that you have to kind of take the temperature on. And it's going to depend on how they're performing when the trade deadline comes around. Because if they're playing like this, I think Kyle Dubas is going to get back into the mode that he was in last year, where he says, okay, they're playing well. They're sitting in a decent spot. I'm going to give them a chance to prove that they can stay in that decent spot and maybe get a little bit better. With guys like Pettersson, with guys like Bunting, with guys like Drew O'Connor, who's on an expiring deal and is probably going to be a name that's thrown about around the trade deadline this year. Does it make sense to trade them? To a certain extent, yes. Specifically, a guy like Marcus Pettersson. Maybe not a Michael Bunting, because right now, Michael Bunting is probably not going to garner as much of a return, but I think the return for a Marcus Pettersson is just going to be too great to hold on to. And this is a great opportunity here with him out week to week for you to see what you have for whenever that question and dilemma does come up. So far, they're 1 for 1. I'll say yesterday was a win for the Penguins defense core, sans Marcus Pettersson. But I do think that a lot of it is going to depend on where they're at late February into early March in the trade deadline week. And another part of it is going to be, where are these players at? Michael Bunting right now is playing lights out. And if you're in a sell mood, he's going to go for a lot. But I don't think the Penguins are going to be in that as long as they continue to perform the way they're performing. So would it make sense to hold on to some of those guys? Yes, you can't sell the entire farm. But I do think a guy like Marcus Pettersson still ends up on the trade block, even if the Penguins are performing well leading into the trade deadline, simply because that's going to be too much value to pass up. You need a guy like that, but even when the Pens are playing as good as they're playing, do you consider them a danger and a threat in the Eastern Conference playoffs? Probably not, at least not yet. So until they get to that point, which would take a tremendous amount of convincing when it comes to their on-ice play, I don't think it saves, per se, a guy like Marcus Pettersson. Let's go over to Evan, who jumps in and says, Philip Tomasino has cooled off a little bit after his initial 4 to 5 games. Do you think he could get dropped to the third line and give somebody else a chance with Evgeni Malkin? See, he hasn't been putting the points up, but I still have really liked what I've seen from Philip Tomasino, particularly the duo of him and Michael Bunting. Something about that duo just works and has just worked very well over the, past, 6, 7 games at this point since Tomasino joined the Penguins. I like that duo, and I like that duo in a second line role. I don't think simply because he's not scoring, you drop him down, especially because who do you put up in his absence? Drew O'Connor, I think, is a candidate to be dropped in the lineup because he has fallen off. Like, he has his days, he has his games, he has his stretches where, oh, there's another good opportunity. There's another good opportunity. But then he also has those stretches where you look at him and you say, okay, he's performing like a fourth liner and he's not finishing his opportunities. Maybe he's just a fourth liner. Whereas a guy like Tomasino, even when he's not finishing, which, yeah, he had, I think it was 3 goals in his first 5 games, something like that. He was finishing well early on. Even if he's not finishing, which it's only been a handful of games since, he's still playing well. He's still setting up a Michael Bunting. He's still setting up Evgeni Malkin for chances. So I like what I've seen from Tomasino, and I think just because he hasn't scored doesn't mean that he's playing bad hockey. I think he's, quite on the contrary, playing pretty good hockey. And I think that when it comes to giving somebody else a chance to play with Gino, I don't think you change anything if it's working. And right now, Tomasino and Bunting next to Evgeni Malkin, it's been working. That line has been good more times than it hasn't been. So I would stick him there and I'd keep him there alongside Evgeni Malkin. Peter says, who knew the Penguins would trade for a guy named Phil Tomasino and they are now good again? Does it continue? I hope it does. I hope it does. The one thing that I've learned, though, about this Pittsburgh Penguins team is they are, possibly more so than ever before, extremely hard to predict. Would you have predicted that they were going to go 7-2-1 when they played majority over 500 teams? Especially when leading into that stretch, they had 1 win against a team over 500, which was the 4-2 win over the Washington Capitals? No, I wouldn't have predicted that. I didn't see it coming, and they surprised me. So again, I'm not going to try to predict whether or not they're going to be able to continue this, but they're getting into better habits. They're playing better defensively. They're getting better goaltending. Still not great goaltending, but they're getting better goaltending. The bar was low, but it's better now. Their forwards, that's the one thing that makes me a little bit nervous. Their forwards and their finishing. Because right now, they're doing this on the backs of everybody except Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin. And I know what you're going to think. Well, that's great. Because eventually you expect 87 and 71, they're going to figure it out. And then the team behind them is playing really good. The problem with that is the team behind them is playing almost too good on the offensive side of the ice. leading into yesterday's action, and I put this out there yesterday on X, formerly known as Twitter. The Penguins from November 27th to yesterday led the NHL in shooting percentage, converting on 14.5% of their shots on goal. That is well above their season average. That is well above expectation for this team. And when they're doing that without Crosby, without Malkin, it's great. But you have to imagine at some point that regresses. So that's what I'll say, Peter, is I don't expect them to be able to score at the pace that they've continued scoring. I mean, you look at Michael Bunting's just scoring at will. Blake Lizotte in a fourth or third line role is scoring at will. The defense, Kris Letang has scored a crap ton of goals over the last couple of weeks. More goals than you would expect Kris Letang to score pretty much in a season at this point of his career. He's put it in the last couple of weeks. At some point, that might revert back. And when it does, you're going to need, not it would be nice, you're going to need Crosby to step up and be the guy that he's been. You're going to need Rickard Rakell to continue putting the puck in the back of the net at the pace that he's been putting the puck in the back of the net. And you're going to need Brian Rust, who I said in the 3-star segment has been shooting lights out during this past 10 games, 21.9% shooting percentage. That's going to fall. He still needs to manufacture goals whenever the rest of the team starts to go into a slump because it's a long season. You can't just keep going up and up and up and up all season long. Eventually, you're going to take a dip, and when you do, the best way to continue winning games is when one player takes a dip, another one steps up and stands up. Can that happen? Potentially. I think they're leaving some stuff to be desired in the press box every night, offensively, with Jarry, but that's a discussion for another time. Let's go over to Scott, who says, well, Nick, where the Pens are at right now, what players do you think realistically could be gone before or by the trade deadline? I think if they play, going back to the question I answered earlier, I think if they play at this level, which is a very high level, but if they play at this level and stick it around this spot in the standings, Kyle Dubas is going to take a step back. He's probably going to still listen to calls. He's probably still going to kind of get the feelers out on what value there is on certain players in the organization. But I think he's going to get a little bit trigger shy like he did last year. Around the deadline, though, I still see Marcus Pettersson being a guy that more than likely is traded. I still see a guy like Drew O'Connor more than likely being a guy that is traded. And then the rest of it is question marks. How are they performing? A Nola Chari. Is there a playoff team that needs a penalty killer that's physical, that has a little bit of offensive upside? That's Nola Chari. Does Matt Nieto play really well? He's on an expiring contract and earn himself an opportunity on a bottom line or as a 13th forward on a contending team. That's a question. Jarry. Does somebody else say, hey, I know he's not playing there. We would love to take him and play him, and we're going to overpay for him because it's the trade deadline, and that's where players get overpaid for? That's a question. So I think there's a long list of maybes. The two that I'm still thinking, unless they become a top 3 team in the Metro, which is still far off, Marcus Pettersson, Drew O'Connor. Those are the two I'm looking at. Let's go over to Tanger. I'm going to take a quick sip first. Tanger says, somehow, some way, let's say the Penguins won the Stanley Cup this year. Who do you think would be the finals MVP for the Penguins? It's Sidney Crosby. Even if he doesn't have a great finals, it would take somebody being spectacular all series long to take it away from Sidney Crosby. Because you look at 2016, Sidney Crosby won the Conn Smythe. He wasn't the best player on the Penguins that playoffs. The player that deserved to be MVP of that playoffs was Phil Kessel. But it's superstar gravity, right? If you're a voter and you're sitting up in the press box and they tell you, hey, the Penguins are about to win the Stanley Cup, look at this list and tell me who the MVP is, you're automatically, your eyes, the pen, if it's electronic, the scroll is going to automatically just, your eyes are going to avert to 87. I think because of that, if they win, when Crosby is in his 20th year. Somehow, by hook or by crook, it's Crosby. I'm not going to make any other prediction because any other prediction right now would be a long shot outside of 87. Let's go over to Bonehead, who says, all caps, love it. Nick, are you looking forward to seeing the play of Letang and Pickering? Do you think Sully will keep that pairing and maybe get some consistency and solidify the defense? I've enjoyed thoroughly watching Owen Pickering and Kris Letang. And I said it earlier, Pickering to this point of the season has gotten the best out of Kris Letang, more than Matt Grzelcyk was able to get, more than Marcus Pettersson was able to get. And I know that you might say, well, I don't really remember Marcus Pettersson playing a lot at 5-on-5 with Kris Letang. Pettersson and Letang have played around, I believe it's 90 minutes. Pickering and Letang have played around 70. So it's a fairly similar sample size, and it's a very large discrepancy in the performance of Letang with Pickering versus Letang with Pettersson. Now, part of that might just be Kris Letang. He might just be playing better now than he was earlier in the season. Very much a likely scenario. But you can't discount how good Owen Pickering has been at 20 years old, mind you, at a position that more frequently than not, players need a little bit longer to develop. He's looked good. He still makes those rookie mistakes. He's still going to have some gaffes. There's still going to be some growing pains. He's 20 years old. It's going to happen. He's going to make mistakes. It's going to cost the Penguins at certain points. But I think the upside is there, and I think Mike Sullivan sees it. Josh Yohe put in The Athletic, I believe it was yesterday, that the Penguins are kind of settling in here with Owen Pickering on the NHL roster. And if that's the case, you look at the left side, it's Pickering, it's Grzelcyk, it's Graves. Doesn't feel like they have a lot of confidence in Ryan Graves. So Graves isn't going to supplant him. You look at the minors, Sebastian Aho's injured. Jack St. Ivany's injured. Ryan Shea's not going to go up on the top pairing. And Matt Grzelcyk, I mean, maybe. But if Matt Grzelcyk goes up there, where's Pickering go? Goes in the second pairing. So I think right now, what you're seeing is Owen Pickering kind of establish himself as, for the time being, a guy that is a no doubt top 4 defenseman on the Pittsburgh Penguins blue line, which is something I didn't think I was going to get to say this year. You obviously hoped that at some point he would get to that point, but in his first year of professional hockey, again, not just NHL hockey, he was in the WHL last year, to be playing 20 plus minutes a night next to Kris Letang, and to not only be stepping up to the challenge, being able to kind of keep up, but to be playing good hockey in that role is a unmitigated success. Absolutely tremendous what we've seen from Pickering and Letang, and I'm excited to see where this goes. Mission to Mars says, are you pleased with the depth of scoring this team has at this point in the season? I am. I think there have been players this year that I look at and I say, I am much happier seeing them in the bottom 6 and getting opportunities than anybody I've seen over the last couple of years. Cody Glass, for example, has been so much fun to watch. Blake Lizotte, when somebody said to me this summer, the Penguins signed Blake Lizotte, and I said, okay, I wonder what we're getting here. And I asked a couple people that had watched a lot of LA Kings hockey over the last several years. He spent 6 years there, did Lizotte. And they said, well, because they had watched Seattle Kraken hockey, they said, well, did you like what you had out of Brandon Tanev? And I said, not only did I like what I saw out of Brandon Tanev, he was a fan favorite. They said, well, you're getting a very similar player in Blake Lizotte, but he can play center. And I said, well, if he lives up to that, I'll be extremely happy. He's lived up to that and more. Now, do I think the scoring is going to continue at this pace? Probably not. Probably not. But I still like the way that he plays the game. I don't think that he's a guy that's best suited for 4th line minutes right now. I think he's suited for 3rd line minutes. I think he could handle that bump and responsibility. And because of that, I think Cody, and honestly, I could think Cody Glass could handle 2nd line center responsibility if you put him with the right line mates. Now, again, do you have to do that right now? No, because you have a guy like Evgeni Malkin. But when you're looking for the future, these guys are young. These guys, specifically Cody Glass, had pedigree. I like those players. I like what I've seen out of Jesse Puljujärvi. Again, would like to see him get more opportunity, but I like what I've seen out of him. Beauvillier, I've come around on Beauvillier. He's been much, much better. I think that he's best suited in a role where he's at right now. those couple of weeks where he's on the fourth line with Noel Acciari and Matt Nieto and Kevin Hayes doesn't fit his style of play. You're not setting him up for success there. So I'm glad that he's with a guy like Cody Glass, that he's with a guy like Drew O'Connor. I think when he's playing with players like that, you're getting some really good play out of Anthony Beauvillier in the bottom six. So I am pleased with the depth scoring. Again, the one thing I will say is it's almost too good. 14.5% shooting percentage is going to come down. When it does, can you start to manufacture goals still and help out the top six and the power play, who have both been, for the most part this year, fairly good? Let's go over to Evan. Evan says, if Alex Nedeljkovic can pick it up a little bit over the next couple of months, like he did last night, do you think the Penguins trade him for assets at the deadline to give Yoel Blomqvist a chance? Yes, I do. I think if he performs the way he did yesterday, then he is going to be a name that a lot of teams are going to look at. So, again, do I think he's a player that will be traded? That depends on how he performs. But with the standard of the question from Evan, if Ned picks it up a little bit and plays like he did last night, I do think that he's a name that's going to be on the market. Now, again, goaltending trades, feast or famine, right? There's not very many of them. You don't see it a lot, but you could potentially see it if Ned picks it up. I could see Kyle Dubas being open to trading him for the same reason that you said, Evan, because the Penguins really liked what they saw out of Yoel Blomqvist early this season, and towards the end of the year, might want to start getting him more opportunities at the NHL level. Let's go over to Michael, who says, what other young reclamation projects could Dubas get to Pittsburgh as reinforcements? There's a couple names, big names, that have been tossed around or that you probably would be able to recognize. One of them being Nicholas Robertson in Toronto. Most recently, he's been a healthy scratch in favor of Alex Nylander, not William Nylander, Alex Nylander. So Penguins know, or Penguins fans know, it's not a good spot for a young goal-scoring forward in Nick Robertson. They were already kind of on the outs leading into the season. He was given the opportunity. It's just not a good fit. It feels like at some point it's going to come to a head in Toronto. Nick Robertson's a player that I'd look at. It's not going to happen because I don't think the New York Rangers would trade him in division, but man, I'm keeping my eye on that Capo Caco situation with the New York Rangers, because that's a player that if you could get your hands on, certainly takes your team when it comes to a rebuilding process and just adds another very talented young player. Give him more opportunity, put him next to Evgeni Malkin, and I think you're going to get a really solid performance out of him, because he might be a healthy scratch, or might have been a healthy scratch. By no means was he the 13th best forward or the first worst forward on the New York Rangers over this stretch. So Capo Caco is a name I'm keeping an eye on. And I know he's injured, so this is more of a future discussion. But you do have to think very long and hard about Trevor Zegras. His time in Anaheim is coming to an end. It is. And the talent is there. And if there's any room that is going to be able to get him to laser focus in and get the best out of him, it's going to be a room where he's sitting in between Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin. So those are the three that I'm keeping an eye on. One, of course, being very far into the future because the injury to Trevor Zegras is severe. But outside of that, I'm looking at Nick Robertson. I'm looking at Capo Caco and their situations and saying, might be something Kyle Dubas has his eyes on and probably has made a few phone calls about, if I had to guess. Let's go to Ace 80, who says, is it just me, or does it seem like Sidney Crosby is about to go on an absolute heater? If you watched last night's game, it's hard to come away with any other assumption. He scored almost 3 or 4 goals last night. That one, you got to tip your cap to Darcy Kemper, who was absolutely outstanding for the LA Kings, especially on a couple of those chances for Sid. He absolutely robbed them. But he had his mojo last night. If he builds off of that, he's going to score in the next 4 games. Just the way he was playing, you can't imagine he plays 3 more games like that and doesn't put the puck in the back of the net, especially when you consider Philadelphia's coming up on the schedule and Sidney Crosby tends to do some pretty crazy things against the cross-state rivals. So it does seem like once one goes in, it's over. He's going to go on a stretch. And that's what happened the first time. He had 1 goal in the first 10, 11 games of the season. Then he scored 5 in a matter of 6 games. And since then, he scored 2 in 17 or 2 in 18 or something like that. He's scoring in bunches this year. It feels like he's starting to put it together again. And once one goes in, a player like that, you give him an inch, he's going to take a mile. I think he'll start scoring more and more. So I agree with you, Ace 80. Once he gets one in, it's going to be interesting to see how many more follow after that. Let's go over to Evan, who says, Sid is under a point per game. Do you think he finishes the season breaking Gretzky's record? And do you think Sid cares about beating that record? First, the easy answer, no. Sidney Crosby, I'm sure it'd be a cool thing, but Sidney Crosby does not care about beating Wayne Gretzky's point per game season's record. He just doesn't. He has 31 points in 33 games played. If I had to bet, and I'm betting on Sidney Crosby, I'm taking Sidney Crosby. So if I had to bet, I'd say he comes out on top of it, especially because he has 31 points in 33 games, and you've watched the games. He is not playing his best hockey. Far from it, actually. Last night, yes, was some of his best hockey. But more often than not this season, he hasn't been playing his best hockey, and he's still 2 points under a point per game pace almost halfway through the season. You have to imagine at some point he's going to catch fire, he's going to go on a stretch, and he's going to blow past that point per game mark. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he breaks Gretzky's record. I would be very surprised if he gives a crap. Yeah, I'm sure he's not going to talk down on it. I'm sure it's a thing where he's going to say, oh, that's nice, but he won't care about that record, especially if it comes down to him saying, hey, you don't get the record and you make the playoffs, even as the number 8 team, he'll take the playoffs as the number 8 team over a record 20 years in the making. It's just the guy, type of player, type of guy Sid is. Zachary DeRosa says, do you think Dubas should have picked up Wahlstrom? We talked about Wahlstrom earlier in the season on Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or in the offseason, I believe, because there were some rumors that the Penguins were interested. I think there's enough players in the organization right now that I want to see them give a shot to. If you're going to pick up a player, he's got to move the needle. Nick Robertson moves the needle because that's potentially a top 6 guy if everything clicks. Trevor Zegras moves the needle. Capo Caco moves the needle. Oliver Wahlstrom, while maybe a little while ago would have been a nice reclamation project type of waiver claim, you have one in Phil Tomasino that I think takes that spot, and he's taken it well. You have one in Cody Glass that I think takes that spot, and he's played really well in that. You have it like Jesse Puljujarvi, who has been in that spot but deserves more chances. So I don't think adding a guy like Wahlstrom really adds anything to the Penguins right now, because it's not adding to the longer-term future at all. It's adding to the short-term future, saying, can we bring in a young guy that could potentially be here for a couple years and help remain somewhat in the hunt for a playoff spot? They have a lot of those guys in the lineup already. Let's go over to Ace 80, who says, what is your ideal bottom 6 lineup right now? I'm trying to think of it. I thought of a lineup yesterday, but that was considering Malkin for first line wing and Cody Glass moving up. So right now, with the top 6 as is, my ideal bottom 6 lineup would be Cody Glass centering the third line. Hold up. Let me think of that. Let me think this through really quickly. No. Blake Lizotte centering the third line. Cody Glass on one wing. Jesse Puljujarvi on the other wing. Fourth line is Noel Acciari on the wing. Drew O'Connor centering. And Anthony Beauvillier on the other wing. I would take Nieto out of the lineup. Insert Puljujarvi. Excuse me. And I would just change things around like that. Uncle Deeb says, Jesse Puljujarvi would make the bottom 6 so much better. I don't know the love for Nieto, maybe the penalty kill. It is the penalty kill, and it is foot speed as well. I think Nieto edges Puljujarvi out just a little bit like that, and also experience. Yes, Puljujarvi is an experienced player, but Matt Nieto in a bottom six role is more. And the big thing you have said there is penalty kill. That's a huge part of it. I think the most penalty kill ice time that Jesse Puljujarvi has in an entire season is 3 minutes total. So that's a huge part of it. Is Nieto kills penalties. Jesse Puljujarvi just doesn't. Let's go over to Bonehead again. We're running out of time here. But we'll get to as many as we can. Says, I'm excited about our developing defensive core. If St. Ivany can mature, Pickering continues to improve. Maybe next year we have a good shutdown defense. Build from that. What do you think? I think the Penguins need to start building from the back out going forward, especially if they're going to keep around Crosby, which it seems like they're going to, and they should. But if it seems like they're going to keep around guys like Crosby, guys like Rust, potentially a guy like Raquel, he could also end up on the trade market because his trade stock is probably as high as it's going to be for the remainder of his contract. But again, team would have to fall out of contention for something like that to happen. But I'd like to see the Penguins put an emphasis on the blue line going forward because they got a lot of pieces on the forward side of things. And it's a lot easier to kind of find pieces on the open market than it is to build a stout defense through the open market. So I'd love to see St. Ivany continue to grow. I'd love to see Pickering continue to grow. I'd love to see Harrison Brunick get healthy for one. Obviously, he's missing time right now due to an injury in the WHL. I'd love to see him get healthy and get up onto the NHL level and kind of up to speed at the NHL quicker than we expected, which would be great. I mean, he's only 18, so there's no rushing it, but they got a couple of nice pieces. I'd love to see them add and build from the back out, 100%. Evan says, man, I know McGroarty was the better prospect, but I sometimes wish we hadn't traded Jaeger. His attitude towards Sid and the Penguins was amazing, and I wish I could have seen him with a Penguins uniform. That was my biggest issue with the trade, and again, it's not an issue that I'm going to end up... Like, it's not a reason not to make the trade, but man, Braden Jaeger just seemed so excited to be a Pittsburgh Penguin. Right? I mean, they drafted one of his best friends in Tanner Howe this year, and the first thing that Jaeger said is, I was on a boat and I jumped up and I was so excited to see that, you know, Tanner Howe was coming over to the Pittsburgh Penguins. The guy wore his Penguins shirt underneath his jersey for every game last year for the Moose Jaw Warriors. So it seemed like he was very excited. And it does stink that, you know, in the business of hockey, he wasn't able to ever play for the Penguins. But I am also excited about Rutger McGroarty, who seems to be very excited about being a Pittsburgh Penguin as well. And as you mentioned, potentially slightly higher quality of prospect and certainly a much closer prospect to the NHL than Braden Jaeger. McGroarty's starting to play better at the AHL level. He's starting to have things clicked out at that level, and you'd have to imagine at some point that translates up to the NHL roster. Let's go over to Nick, who says, joined late. Not sure if it's been noted how good Owen Pickering... Yeah, this is literally everybody's takeaway from the past couple of weeks. Owen Pickering has been great. He's had his ups and downs. He's had his rookie mistakes. He's had his lapses. But overall, he's been playing very well. And, you know, Nick says here, I think he and Blake Lizotte are the biggest changes in the lineup that have helped turn the tide. I would add on to that Michael Bunting. The flip of the switch in Michael Bunting has added an element to this team that was not there in the first couple of weeks of the season. The Penguins looked hapless on certain nights in the first couple of weeks of the season. And it's hard to imagine a Penguins team that is hapless when Michael Bunting is in the lineup. Because he's a guy that doesn't matter if you're down, doesn't matter what's happening. He's always going to be an energy guy. He wasn't early in the season. Since he flipped that switch, you look at last night, he was all over the ice. He was putting people in headlocks. I want to know what he had to say to that LA Kings defenseman behind the net whenever was it a defenseman? Whoever tripped Evgeni Malkin at the end of that play and Bunting put him in a headlock, he certainly screamed something into his ear. I'd love to hear what he had to say. But Michael Bunting, Blake Lizotte, Owen Pickering, three guys that have come in and helped. I'm not going to say it's all on them. They've been very big pieces to this turnaround for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's go over to what other questions do we have here? We have one from Evan, kind of a statement that is, Jaeger reminds me of Brian Rust and the way that he would be a loyal Penguin for as long as he possibly could be. I mean, yeah, that's going to be very difficult this year for Brian Rust particularly, because right now the Penguins are in that transition mode, and you can hold on to a lot of people. You can't hold on to everybody. I know Rust is high on that list of people that are probably safe, but eventually that list starts to get cut down. There are the obvious names. Lars Eller, gone. Marcus Pettersson right now is probably ahead of that list. But I think Brian Rust, once his contract goes from full no move this year to, I believe, no trade clauses next year, I think he's going to end up being in the conversation if the Penguins don't perform well. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe Kyle Dubas says, well, we got rid of Gensel. We need to keep one of Sid's wingers. And it's not like Brian Rust isn't contributing as well. Let's close it out with this one. Yoda, I'll just say it because the screen name is a lot of words and letters and numbers that I see coded in there. I don't know. Says, would you put Bunting on Sidney Crosby's left wing? No, because right now Sidney Crosby's left winger is leading the Penguins in scoring. It's Rickard Rakell. Rakell and Rust, when things are working, are the perfect line mates for Sidney Crosby. Now, Crosby hasn't been able to finish. There is a little bit of an issue that I have with the way that they, the opportunities they create for him. But listen, what's working is working. Bunting, eventually, could I see him working on Sidney Crosby's wing? 100%. But I think Bunting and Tomasino have kind of developed a really nice rapport. And I think Bunting and Malkin have developed a really nice kind of rapport. And I think what Bunting does opens a lot up for Evgeni Malkin. So I like Bunting on the second line. Would I mind seeing Bunting next to Sidney Crosby? No. But right now, it's Rickard Rakell. And Rickard Rakell has 14 goals. So I'm not sure I would be looking to change that at all. I just want to double check, because Rakell can play both sides. Rust can, but typically plays the right side. But yeah, right now it's Rickard Rakell. So I'm not changing that, because Rickard Rakell is clearly finding success next to Sidney Crosby. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.